Hello. If you've been into tabletop games for the past decade or more, there's a good chance you will have seen your fair share of Kickstarters. The crowdfunding platform launched in 2009, and since then it has become an integral part of the board game marketplace. Thanks to Kickstarter, some extremely popular titles have gotten their start. For example, in 2010, Cards Against Humanity was funded with a campaign raising $4,000. And, like it or not, the game is still going to this day. In 2015, the card game Exploding Kittens exceeded its funding goal of $10,000 in just 8 minutes of going live, ending with more than 200,000 backers and more than $8.7 million raised. It set a record for the most pledges ever, and is still in the top 10 most successful Kickstarter campaigns. It's not just card games that can do well though. There are loads of other types of tabletop games that have succeeded through crowdfunding. Another current top 10 campaign is Frosthaven, the 2020 sequel to dungeon-crawling smash hit Gloomhaven. The Frosthaven Kickstarter racked up $13 million of funding from 85,000 people. It was only surpassed as the most successful tabletop game on the platform when fantasy fiction savant Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere RPG launched last year with a $15 million campaign. I think we all know now that Kickstarter can be a really important tool in the kit of developers for new board games, for new tabletop games of any kind, really. There is a conventional wisdom to the platform that says if you can get enough support early on, about 20% of your funding, then you are 80% likely to succeed overall, that you'll get all of the funding you're asking for and potentially more. So early success tends to breed later success, and that has brought with it all kinds of different ecosystems and hype cycles and lots of different strategies around using the actual platform. So there are many good ways to get successes on there, but there's also some cautionary tales as well. In 2012, the rules around Kickstarters were updated so that campaigns had to be clear about the risks and challenges around their development. And you could only post photos and images of real prototypes and things that actually existed. You couldn't promise a load of functionality or inclusions that you couldn't achieve or hadn't had made when you launched the campaign. That was all in aid of reducing fraud and mitigating campaigns that were successful but never delivered. Whilst important, those changes still haven't completely prevented major disasters, such as Palladium's Robotech campaign, which raised $1.4 million in 2013, didn't deliver most of the product to its backers, and then lost the license to the IP before they could complete production of the game and its supplements. Some companies have fallen into cycles of Kickstarter after Kickstarter, rolling from one project into the next one. Before they've even delivered it, they're already into the next hype cycle as it goes. That can work really well for some companies for some periods of time, but that can also cause long-running challenges too. A major Kickstarter-powered company, Simon, who used to be called Cool Mini or Not, produced a huge number of board games through Kickstarter funding, particularly their popular Zombicide series. In fact, they have run more than 50 Kickstarters between 2012 and 2023, and raised more than $108 million doing so. It was only recently that they signed an exclusivity deal for future crowdfunding projects with Kickstarter's rival GameFound. However, economic factors like spiking US tariffs and uncertainty forced Simon to cease all future game development and sell off some of their biggest IPs, such as Zombicide. Personally, I think that crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and GameFound, and others as well, can be a really cool way to get support for a game, to help get it completed and to move it through those final cycles to actually then make it a real thing that people can buy. There are plenty of risks inherent in that process, and some of that also comes down to the dangers around sort of overhyping, overpromising, building campaigns that offer a great deal of stuff, or are built around FOMO and exclusivity to the exclusion of sort of later supporters, really trying to get people through the door and prevent people later on from getting the most out of the games. There are dangers. I think that that is definitely true, but there's also ways to use Kickstarter effectively, I think. And earlier this year, I was very pleased to get the chance to speak with a company who are now using Kickstarter, literally right now, to fund their brand new game, their first ever game, Saurozoic Warriors Arena. Now, I was super excited to be invited to chat to the creators of this game because they included Stephen Baker, the creator of HeroQuest, one of my favourite designers, an absolutely incredible opportunity. And just to be totally transparent here, I was paid to make this video and also paid to make a couple of other videos as well earlier in the year. These development diaries, 3 videos that look at the process of the creation of Saurozoic Warriors Arena. A chance for me to have conversations with the people behind it and to run through all of the steps that go into creating a brand new board game and then launching it on Kickstarter. So that is my totally candid truth. I am making, this is an advert of sorts. But fortunately, and I was very, very pleased about this, the guys at Boss Fight Studio who actually commissioned me to make these videos and have created the game were totally open to me exploring whatever topics, whatever aspects of that process that I thought were the most interesting. And that is why I have chosen to end this journey, end this story with the launch on Kickstarter. Sort of what are the processes and the steps that go into that final bit of the journey of launching a game on Kickstarter to crowdfunding, trying to get people invested, trying to get people involved. And what do you have to do in order to do that, to actually get it over the line? So that's the conversations that we had to finish off this series of development diaries. The game we're talking about is Saurozoic Warriors Arena, a gladiatorial combat game set in a unique universe of super smart dinosaur warriors who are fighting for supremacy in a volcanic battleground. It has been designed by Stephen Baker, the man behind the original HeroQuest and Space Crusade and Battle Masters, and it's being produced by Boss Fight Studio. Traditionally, Boss Fight make modern action figures, including some featuring these same Saurozoic Warriors style characters. But this is their first step into making board games, a journey that I have explored in my previous Dev Diary videos. So Boss Fight had developed this game. They put about a year of development and design time into it. Stephen Baker had done all of his great work. He'd built out the rules. They'd built out all of the sort of key things that they needed to be in the box. But then you get to this point where you are kind of saying, right, how do we launch this? How do we actually put it into production? How do we get it manufactured? And then how do we get it into people's hands? This is where one of the first biggest challenges for Saurozoic Warriors, for Boss Fight, started to really take shape. And that was the recent uncertainty around US tariffs.
I always joke with people that, developing a game is like watching an action movie and there will be a crisis. It's like, if you have an action movie where nothing ever went wrong, it's like it would be pretty dull.
Right.
And the reality is that if nothing has gone wrong, it just hasn't gone wrong yet. It's like something's going to go wrong. The toy and game industry is not unique in seeing this as a very challenging problem.
How do tariffs and the sort of uncertainty around tariffs, how do they affect a game like Saurozoic Warriors Arena?
Oh, it makes it really challenging. And, at Boss Fight, we're trying to make it as fair as we can for consumers and not create an unfair amount of padding into the cost of the game. So we really ride the line on making all of our products achievable or consumable easily, to grab. The price point's low, but there's a huge uncertainty from when we make the game and even as we're shipping the game to what the cost of the tariff is going to be as it comes to shore. So it's a super challenging time to be a developer.
That uncertainty, does that basically just mean there's a big cost variance, potential cost variance? Is that where the uncertainty hits hardest?
Yeah, and we've had costs dialed in, and as we ship, tariffs will change, and as it comes to shore, we're paying double the tariff, and that hurts margins. That also is, at that point, it's not fair to the consumer who's pre-ordered something to change price. So a lot of the times companies are just absorbing that cost. And, the agreements that we have, we just need to be really careful with it. Some companies are shuddering over it because they can't absorb the cost because the margins are so thin, or because they've had pre-orders go so long and product change in price so much that they can't fulfill it to those terms.
In the modern industry, it is not unusual at all for a board game to have many of its components, its cards, its box, its miniatures produced in factories in China. And if you've backed any Kickstarters, there's a good chance that you will have encountered the Chinese New Year that takes place around February and March. Almost always, factories close down for a period of weeks, and it seems like quite a surprise for many Kickstarter companies, many of these project-leading companies. They sort of discover, oh, actually, we can't get anything made, we can't get anything shipped. So it's a natural problem. But of course, because they are producing so much stuff in China, the uncertainty around tariffs that have been introduced in the recent past by Donald Trump and his government, that brings a layer of complexion because you don't always know how much it's going to cost you to ship things from one country to another country. In this case, these tariffs were on Chinese shipping, so anything coming from China into the US would therefore be subject to additional taxes and tariffs, and that would have an additional cost. But they didn't know how much that was going to be. So that challenge is the same kind of thing. That same uncertainty is what has given CMON so much trouble. They can't always predict how much it's going to cost to ship all of their products. They've got a lot of products waiting to be shipped because they've done Kickstarter after Kickstarter after Kickstarter, and that has then led them into a bit of financial uncertainty, instability, and caused all of their subsequent problems. But this tariff situation was only one factor that has influenced the delay of Saurozoic Warriors launching on Kickstarter. Another was the actual nature of the campaign itself. What do you offer on Kickstarter in order to get people excited, to bring them in early? As I mentioned earlier, that conventional wisdom is that the earlier you can get support, the better it is for the campaign's health and for its likelihood of succeeding. You want people in the early doors. There is, I don't know if there's specific figures around this. I've not seen them if there are, but a few people I've spoken to about running Kickstarters have suggested that the vast majority of your backing comes in the first couple of days and the last couple of days of your campaign. That bit in the middle isn't quite as important, it seems, as when you first launch and then just before you end. There's a real spike of people. The excitement early on, people really want to follow the campaign and be part of it and get hyped. And then a number of people who may have bookmarked it early or have only just stumbled upon it in the last couple of hours, the last couple of days, that is when they decide if they are going to back it. Are they going to make this call? And some of those people are influenced by the amount of support that has already been secured. So that makes it really important, those two different periods, to have a big campaign up front and to have a big finish at the end.
There are all of these things that they're sort of having to navigate, which is, what are the assets that you have to create? How do you initially drive the awareness? How do you get the sort of the fan engagement? How do you ensure that the people who sign up or follow the campaign ultimately transition to buy the game? What is it that you can do? I mean, so there's a whole strategy discussion that is ongoing.
In order to help with that early engagement, there's lots of stuff that can be done. In the case of Boss Fight Studio and Saurozoic Warriors, they reached out to me to have me make some videos about Saurozoic Warriors early on. So I put my first couple of dev diaries out before the Kickstarter was launched, before there was even a Kickstarter page. There was actually a pre-launch page where people could go and they could see a bit of information. There were incentives to sign up for email and to get newsletters and sort of news and notice of when it does go live. That kind of stuff, to build that initial list, is really important to kind of get the head of steam going into the campaign, because you want early backers. So that was a big part of it. A little bit of buzz generation, getting people talking about it, running adverts, making it known that this thing exists and it's going to be coming. Kind of creating the countdown to the Kickstarter campaign countdown. And then the other big part of actually securing the backing is making the offer and making the actual campaign appealing. Now, it is a very interesting thing because it is possible, and we have seen many Kickstarters built entirely around the exclusivity. You can only get access to this supplement, to this expansion, to these adventures, this extra art, these extra miniatures, if you back the Kickstarter now. That stuff's never going to come to retail, so if you're not invested today, you're going to miss out. I personally, as a collector, I'm not a fan of this, and I can understand why it exists, and there is a perfectly reasonable, or some people would have a perfectly reasonable argument to say that's fine. If you're there early, if you support it, you help to get this thing made in the first place, you're rewarded for that. That also, it can rub some people up the wrong way. It can make it really hard to become a collector. It can put people off even becoming a collector or supporting a game because they can't get access to everything that was produced for it. And actually, this was something that really was very relevant to the guys at Boss Fight Studio when they were thinking about what they were going to offer in their campaign.
Is there a challenge in sort of balancing the exclusivity and the early bird stuff and then the like long-term support for the game? Like where do you draw the line in what's available at what points?
I can tell you it's a really common conversation we have as a team. And every time we go, oh, this will be exclusive, somebody goes, that is going to aggravate someone who's a completionist later.
Yeah.
And we've always walked it back to make sure that there's some avenue for completionists later on to get everything. So we found opportunity to make it affordable, make it incentivized for early backers. But we will have an all-in tier that everything will be available, on the back end for folks. So the hardest part is just getting the word out and letting them see it as early as possible. So that's always kind of the bummer of, hey, I just found out about this. I didn't know there was an exclusive card. What the heck, guys? So we are going to find a way to make sure that everyone can have access to that. Ideally, everybody would see it. And that's the biggest challenge of getting more eyeballs on it.
I will be totally honest. I've had my misgivings with crowdfunding platforms in the past. We've seen stuff that has been a bit shady in places. We've seen crowdfunding platforms like Unbound for publishers that just the entire platform itself was corrupt in that instance. I don't think there's anything like that happening with Kickstarter, but we've seen things where even legitimate campaigns with the best of intentions have been significantly delayed, have run into problems that were not anticipated. Obviously, there are challenges there, but I think still it is a really powerful tool and a good one to be able to bring in people who want to back something, who want they basically want this thing to exist so much that they're willing to invest upfront. As someone who does the work that I do and the way in which I do it, my entire operation, Jordan Sorcery, is entirely funded in a similar way. People want my work to continue to exist. They want me to research and investigate and document the history of Warhammer and tabletop games. They want me to interview the people who make it, and they want that to continue. And in order for it to continue, they want to back me on Patreon. And you can do that too if you go to patreon.com/Jordan Sorcery. But that is an investment in me continuing to make this work. That's what's happening on Kickstarter. People want that investment to continue. They want the work to produce a game at the end of it. I can respect that. I think there's definitely something in it. So I can see why Kickstarter is still a valuable tool for the creation of games. I will also admit that I'm currently working on a little RPG zine that I'm anticipating launching through Kickstarter in the new year. And, hopefully that gets some support and people are excited about that and want to come in and support the creation of that. So I'm sort of disposed to look relatively kindly onto Kickstarter. I think there's definitely value and virtue to its use. For Saurozoic Warriors Arena, it was an important economic decision. They had to use Kickstarter. They had to use some kind of crowdfunding platform in order to justify the expenditure, the investment in creating the game in the first place, and then, getting to that final bit, the production, moving it from it's an idea and we've designed it and here's what it looks like to now there's a number of copies being manufactured that we can actually sell to people. As a small studio, as a small outfit, taking their first step into board game design, it does feel like it makes a lot of sense. It kind of feels like that's well within the original remit back in 2009 that Kickstarter was set up to support. Indie game development, people who wanted to make a thing, not necessarily just games, but people who wanted to make a thing, and they had a lot of passion, and they really wanted it to be good, but they just couldn't afford to do it upfront. So they wanted people who felt the same about it to come in and support it. And I think that's what we're seeing here. I think even the exclusivity and the way in which the campaign has been structured and the packages and what's offered there, I think all of that has been done in such a way so that there's no time-limited exclusivity. It is just, if you want to come all in and you really love this thing and want to support it wholeheartedly, and you've got the money to do so, then you're going to get everything. If you can't do that, all of that stuff will be available in different ways in the future, and I think that that's a good way to go about that too. As I said before, this is part of a series of videos, the Developer Diaries. This is the third and final part. You can go and watch parts 1 and part 2 if you want to find out about the design of the game. How did Stephen Baker come up with the actual concepts, the rules, the structures that are all in the actual game itself? How did they prototype it and turn it into the product that is now available on Kickstarter? And of course, if you are interested in finding out more about the current version of the game, the one that is on Kickstarter, the campaign that is live right now, I've included a link down in the description below. Go and check it out. If you do decide to back it, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from folks who have taken a look and what they think. I'd love to hear from people who are really excited about it and what you're most looking forward to from the game, all of that kind of good stuff. Yeah, just go and have a look and see what you think. And then if you like it, let me know. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you to Boss Fight Studio and to Stephen Baker for taking the time and for inviting me to be a little part of the background, the behind the scenes journey to actually getting this game into people's hands. I think that it's been a really fun, insightful opportunity. I hope that you folks have enjoyed coming along on this journey. Let me know if you'd like to see more of this kind of thing. I don't know if I've fully got my arms around the production sort of dev diary format yet, but it was, for me, a really fascinating process, and I feel like I've learned a lot about actually creating games, and I hope that I've been able to share some of that with you. I would love to do more of this in the future if you guys enjoyed this kind of stuff. So there you go. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.